Thank you. Good afternoon. I'm Bruce Mandel. I'm the chairperson of the Madaket Area Plan Workgroup. And I'm calling this meeting of the Madaket Area Plan Workgroup to order. This open meeting of the Madaket Area Plan Workgroup is being conducted in Zoom format. Please note that this meeting is being recorded and will be available for viewing on the town's YouTube channel. And this meeting also is being transcribed for the AI companion that the town is using, and it will create a summary and basically an outline of minutes. And of course, minutes will be taken. So I will conduct a roll call for attendance and for votes as necessary. Zoom participants are asked to identify themselves and make a note of any affiliations for members of the public. Hold on, let's see. So your name will be on the screen under your Zoom connection. All Zoom participants are asked to mute their device unless they're addressing the committee. There are members of the public who have asked to speak. Therefore, this meeting will feature a 3-minute time period for public statements about items that are not on the agenda. And this is in keeping with the latest policy for town meetings that has been propagated by the select board and as a result of town council's advice. The member of the public that is with us is Sarah Hendrickson, and I will call on her at the right time. Okay, I have now determined that we have a quorum, so we can move on with our meeting. And the first item of business is to approve the agenda for this meeting, which you all have copies of. So if anyone has any agita with the agenda, now's the time to speak. If not, I will entertain a motion to approve the minutes. Let's see if I can get Jesse Bell here.
Jesse just came over, and
Oh,
Ethan.
good. And Ethan, perfect.
Yep.
There we go. Okay. So I need a motion to accept the minutes and a second, please.
So moved.
Thank you, Michael.
I'll second.
Thank you, Art. And now I'll just call a roll call, or how about, is anyone opposed to accepting the minutes? Please indicate by raising your hand so I can see you on the screen. There are no hands raised, so I will declare that the minutes are approved unanimously. The next item of business is public comment for items not included in the agenda. Sarah, are you just listening, or do you want to make a comment? You have to unmute. There you go.
Can I ask 2 questions?
Sure.
Okay. The 2023 survey that was done, which is one of the documents online for the work group, I think about 200 Madaket residents filled it out. I'm curious if that survey informed or continues to inform the work you all are doing now. And sort of linked, there was a reference, I think in that same document posting, to something I had never come across called the Country Overlay District to discourage development. And I was curious about the origin of that, and again, whether that informed, was in any way related to the work that you all are doing.
I think I can briefly answer your question, and then if you have more that you're interested in, you have my email address and we can chat. But the
Hey,
2023
Bruce.
survey,
Bruce,
yes,
hold on a second. I don't know if you were watching, but the one thing that Lauren Goldberg said at the select board meeting is public comment, don't reply,
okay,
because it's an open meeting law violation. So what you should do is, I know, watch the select board meeting. It's very good, but I'm just going to say, take Sarah's comments and then we can have a reply then.
okay. So
Sorry.
we can't reply during the session, but I've written down her questions
Thank you.
and I'm permitted to reply offline.
I would say next meeting, make a statement and
Okay.
reply.
I will do that. Thank you for your questions. You're questioning about the 2023 survey and whether it's being used for the work of this committee. And you've asked about a reference to the country overlay district, which is one of several overlays that Madaket has to juggle. So I will get that information to you.
Thank you.
Thank you. I have your email address. Thank you. Thank you for that advice, Joe. I know I often get my hands slapped with this open meeting law.
That's right. Everyone should see Mrs. Goldberg's presentation from KP Law. It's very informative.
Yeah, I saw it. It's just drives me nuts, but okay.
Easy now. Remember, it's recorded line.
Yeah. Okay, the next item of business is approving the minutes from our January meeting. They were distributed, and I hope you all got them. Does anybody have anything to say about the minutes needing correction or adjustment? Seeing none, that would be appropriate then to get a motion to approve these minutes so they can be posted. Can I have a motion to approve?
So moved.
So moved.
Thanks, Lars. Second,
Michael,
Michael.
second.
Okay. Anybody opposed to approving the minutes? Please indicate by raising your hand. Okay, the minutes from the January 10th, 2025 meeting are approved unanimously. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. The next item of business is to review our draft copy of Chapter 3, the housing chapter. And I'm going to turn the meeting over to Michael and Lars to walk us through the work they have been doing and any material that they use will likely be posted in our Google Drive account and available to the public to see. So Michael and Lars, you got the ball.
Okay, I'll start, and Lars and I, as the members of the work group know, I'll call it a draft discussion document to be looked at by members of the committee, that followed an outline that is part of the language in the state chapters, describing the chapters for each of the 9 elements of the planning. And for housing, it says the following. The housing element identifies and analyzes existing and forecasted housing needs and objectives, including programs for the preservation, improvement, and development of housing. This element shall identify policies and strategies to provide a balance of housing opportunities for all citizens. What I did in the draft was, and it has been circulated to everyone in the group, I believe, was first to just do a paragraph on existing conditions. It kind of described, and this is from living in Madaket, but equally from a lot of language that was circulated during the surveys. Existing conditions talking about sort of natural features, the general nature of housing development in Madaket, and then went on to break the discussion document into three parts. One on preservation, which is really dealing with existing housing and building stock. Secondly, improvement. And then thirdly, development of new housing. And again, this wasn't intended to be a proposed document for submission to the town and the state, as much as to raise points that needed to be discussed and probably, and whether or not some of these things should be included in the final recommendations. So I've had feedback from Lars and Bruce, and Lars and I have had some lengthy discussion about it as well. And I think just some overall comments I would make first that relate to the document, but also kind of what comes out of it. Looking back at what was done in 2006, the housing piece was very abbreviated. There were 4 recommendations. And I think it's a much more relevant and issue that has a huge amount of interest at this point. A lot has happened in the 18 years since the last one in Madaket and the island, and particularly development. So I think larger themes that are raised in the document. Number one, coming back to something Bruce has done a lot of work on, which is establishing an agreed upon or recommended boundary for Madaket for purposes of all of the plan. And it's a considerably larger area than was shown in 2006. And what I think would be what we would recommend is that again, subject to further discussion and actually writing a report, but focusing, number one, identifying that. And I think that's something that's probably going to be identified in the land use chapter, which comes before this, and it'll also be identified in the introduction that Bruce is doing, because it's germane to everything that we do in terms of the area included. And then looking at existing housing, I think an overarching issue is something that we talked about in the surveys and as a work group, which is examining whether the need exists for exploring a new zoning overlay for Madaket, particularly if it's going to be a larger boundary area, and trying to find something that could address concerns about density, about affordable housing, about worker housing, about other density related issues in terms of secondary structures, tertiary structures, and also incorporating into it some of the recommendations from the Coastal Resilience Plan. In particular, where the Coastal Resilience Plan focused heavily on I believe it's, hang on with the term, priority action areas and high risk, where they make some pretty detailed recommendations in terms of limiting any future development or even expansion of existing homes because of the risk to them. So that's another very relevant issue for existing housing and preservation. I think in our discussions, it's clear that if we are to look at zoning, and I think we believe that exploring a zoning overlay is important and could be very relevant, that we would need to look to outside professional assistance. During the surveys, we identified an attorney based in Massachusetts, a land use attorney who's has extensive experience in these areas and has looked at density issues and worked with coastal towns, Newburyport, Newbury among them, and done a fair amount of zoning work. We would need to find someone like that to help us. And during the survey period, that gentleman was willing to share his time for several meetings with us at no expense. But in order, if we want to pursue this, we're going to have to, number one, decide as a group that we want to do it. Number two, determine the scope of that work with this individual or someone like him, and the cost. It's not going to be free. So I think that's something that we'll have to address. And the zoning really would be as relevant or even more relevant to the first chapter, land use, as it would with housing. And quite frankly, it would end up addressing probably a number of the other, in some ways, other chapters as well. So that's a big topic for our work group to continue to discuss and resolve in the near term. And I think if we elect to take that route, I don't think we would get into enormous detail in terms of some of the issues that you might otherwise get into with regard to preservation, but in particularly improvement of existing units, buildings and housing, and new development. I think the zoning would end up, if we go that route and come up with a proposed zoning article, it would address a lot of these issues, and the detail in terms of what our recommendations or suggestions for dealing with historic housing or historic buildings, affordable work, and density issues. A lot of that would reside within the proposed zoning article. And I think then the land use and the housing chapters would probably be less detailed with a lot of reference to the proposed zoning articles. That's just a kind of an overarching look at this rather than going through point by point, but I've turned over to Lars to make his observations and comments as well.
Yeah, I think, particularly if, as we very closely look to the survey work we did, the overriding push, I think it was in the 90% for Madaket, is low density, lots of sunlight, all the things we all love about Madaket. So I think the most important work to come out of the entire group, in my opinion, and it touches many chapters, is zoning. So Michael and I were thinking that from a structural standpoint, we don't know exactly what the best chapter is for zoning, but for instance, the one we're working on here, chapter 3, somewhere in this document is going to be an intensive look at our recommendations for zoning, supported by our map surveys. As Michael mentioned, that we'll need some outside help to make that professional and precise. But a number of chapters, including chapter 3 and chapter 1, another one, rather than being repetitious, and saying the same thing on zoning over and over. We need to find the right place to have all of our zoning views. And then chapters like 3 can just refer to it. As we stated in our zoning document, we support, whatever that is. So that's, I think you also, and this is something for discussion. I think on very hot topic issues like short-term rentals and affordable housing, I think we can take a position. But I think it's way beyond our bandwidth to propose solutions. I mean, we've all seen the town meetings. The town can't decide on short-term rentals. I think we can take positions on this is what we would like. This is what we support. I know my personal opinion, and I think Michael agreed, but he can speak for himself, is it'd be too daunting for us to try to write solutions as an example for short-term rentals. So people can have different opinions, but I think what we'll do is state our positions, what we are pro or con. But I'll repeat myself. I don't think we're in a position to say this is what has to happen, because I don't think we have the bandwidth or the expertise, and it's kind of useless unless something happens at town meeting anyway. So we have some existing regulations we want to keep in place, but again, that all falls into the zoning area. And as Michael mentioned, we need some of this outside help to make it precise and professional. I have no idea what that might cost. Obviously, we don't have a budget, and we don't have answers right now, but we'll have to think of potentially where a grant perhaps could come from another group to help us afford some of this. So, that's our work. Anyone can weigh, we have a small group doing this. Our goal, like with each of the chapters, just to remind everyone kind of our structure here, is each little group on the chapters is going to take this to a 90% completion rate, then share it with everyone. And people can, chime in with any kind of thoughts or comments at that point. I think it's too unwieldy for all of us to be weighing in on all the chapters all the time. So just a reminder that that's the structure, but everyone will have a chance to see a 90% complete version of this chapter and all the other ones as they get rolling. So, Mr. Chairman, with that, I'll pause there and we'll, get anyone's comments or feedbacks or thoughts as you see fit.
Well, thank you, Lars and Michael. A good update, and I appreciate the hard work you guys have put in. There is a housing chapter draft, and after this meeting, based on the comments here that we can input into it, I feel comfortable posting it on our Google Drive, where you can read it. You can't edit it, but you can insert comments into it, or I won't say a comment, suggestions. Michael and Lars touched on some very important subjects. Of course, a little bit of background for you on zoning. Very early on in creating the various town area plan or island area plans for the various neighborhoods, and I think there are 7 or 8 of them. Our group had a meeting with the planning director to get some guidance, and he was very clear that Madaket zoning was antiquated and we should give some consideration to amending it. However, the planning department would not initiate or participate in that development of a Madaket zoning amendment. He was very clear that the work group should do that, and it should be backed up by survey information, meeting discussions, things like the annual meeting for all the residents that have held every summer. And that plays into this. So that's a frame of reference that that kind of guides us. I want to spend a minute or two on the boundary, because the same guidance was given to us about the boundary being antiquated. And the current boundary It certainly doesn't embrace all of the neighborhoods in what is now Madaket. And there are different definitions of Madaket, and we need to come up with the right definition. Now, I'll give you just really quick couple of examples. The Board of Health has what they call a watershed. And they have a Madaket watershed that consists of an area A and B, and it encompasses a greater area than the current one that's in the 2006 Madaket area plan. There was an estuary study done years ago that dovetailed with the Board of Health's two major watersheds, which they label A and B. And the estuary report broke that down into 7 sub-watersheds. But they essentially took the same boundary. There's also a group that deals with the Madaket Harbor watershed, and they have a boundary. I've got these documents, I'll share them as we go along. And most recently, I've noticed that the HDC has a unique definition of what is Madaket. And this is displayed in their various listings of applications they're reviewing during a particular meeting. And they color code Madaket projects or applications in yellow. Other areas are highlighted in different colors. And if you look at the latest HDC agenda, you will see that many of the roads or locations of the applications are not just in the old historic Madaket district. So we've got to balance this out and work on it. But the bottom line is we need a definition of what's Madaket. And that's something that we need to work. And your input, all of you, is very important on this. Michael mentioned historic structures. The town has a planner who's very involved in historic structures. It's essentially the basis for Nantucket's designation as an historic landmark. Something that Sarah is aware about because of a letter she recently found. But in dealing with Holly, who is the planner, any house constructed between the 1600s and 1975 is essentially considered of historic value. And they started to survey the whole island, but they did Madaket. And we can see that on an overlay at the GIS. If you go to the themes and go to the historic overlay, you'll see all these little red triangles on properties. Those are properties that have already been surveyed and designated of historical significance. And this is part of something we're dealing with at the HBC as they authorize the destruction of these houses, which can affect our historic designation according to the Department of the Interior. So these are interesting articles to throw into our chapter. I sent out a document, I think I got my hand slapped for sending it out recently, that lists some of the major topics in housing, and I hope you've all received that, but it talked about workforce housing, density, solar panel guidelines, kind of a building with Madaket in my mind guide that the HDC and CONCOM and FinCom have asked for as a guiding document. The expansion of the Village Height Overlay District, which was a controversial thing at the HDC meeting this week. And for Sarah's benefit, there's a Village Height Overlay District, a Country Over District, and there's a Solar Overlay District for Madaket. And I think there's one more too. So sorting through that is not easy. We had talked about new regulations for building with sea level or sea rise in mind. And then a discussion on 40B housing. These are all important issues. Michael mentioned employee dormitory. And there's a difference between employee dormitories and employee housing. One is more permanent than the other, and one causes significant problems in terms of traffic, noise, density, and things of that nature. So these are things that if you guys have any thoughts about, please funnel them. And when we started this with the open meeting law stuff, supposed to get funneled through the chairperson and then down to the work group subcommittee on housing. So I'd appreciate, and so would Michael and Lars, I think, any input that you might have and thoughts about any of these subjects. Corporately owned STRs and their impact on neighborhoods, corporately owned STRs that are owned by off-island developers with no contact information. You know, how do we address this? Many of the neighborhoods find, and there are about 8 different neighborhoods in Madaket. Many of them have expressed their consternation at the disruptive nature of some of these noise, parking, trash, things like that. So it's all a matter of, I think, putting this jigsaw puzzle together. JP, I see your hand raised. So please unmute.
Thanks. And thanks, Lars and Michael for the work you did here. I forget exactly how Lars phrased it, but agree with the notion that this is a big topic, maybe the most important topic, and so getting our arms around it is critical. And I think you sort of have laid the groundwork in a nice way. So thank you. I think the thing that stands out to me as I just as an initial reaction, so take it for for the little bit, the 2 cents that it's worth, is that there's this inherent tension between kind of the preservation instincts that so many folks in Madaket have, with also this big hairy problem that we have around housing affordability and making this an island where people can live and it can be reasonable. I mean, one of the things that's in the news just this week is a 20% or 30% increase that's going to infect a lot of year-round folks. And so as I think about sort of the challenge of like the scale of this problem, it seems like maybe we're trying to do a little bit too, not that the zoning idea isn't a good idea. It very much strikes me as an obvious and good idea. But are we perhaps trying to achieve too much through zoning alone? In other words, if we listed out all the problems that we're trying to solve, and then we looked at zoning, would we say, oh, okay, that's really going to swallow that elephant? Is that, or do we need a host of solutions? And so that's just the knee-jerk reaction to what I think is a very good, first cut at this, or at least for me, it's my first time seeing it. So for whatever that's worth, that's where I am after having seen it.
I appreciate it.
Thank you. Michael. You're muted, buddy. Michael, you're muted. There you go.
There we go. They wouldn't respond to my finger push. JP, don't disagree with you. I think we're not arguing that zoning is going to be an end-all be-all or capture all these issues. But I think you look at the things that can be done, and there are certain things that are more obvious, I think you could do with zoning, which is, for example, addressing people's concerns about keeping open space and dark skies, with lighting regulations. Some of those the island has, some of them may be a little bit customized to us. So no, we couldn't do all of, I think to Lars's point, we wouldn't necessarily be trying to struggle with advocating solutions to that long list of things like affordable housing, workforce, but we might, for example, address indirectly some of those things. For example, workforce housing. Workforce housing typically is going to be dense, multi-unit. It requires infrastructure, water, sewer. It requires transportation. Typically, you want it located next to where employment exists. All of those things are absent in Madaket. And, you know, if you're designing zoning that's going to not contemplating future sewer or, you know, reducing density, we don't necessarily have to propose a solution for workforce housing here. We may simply say we don't support it for the following reasons. Yes, workforce housing is necessary, but this is about the last place a developer doing or the town spending money doing workforce housing would come out here. I'm not advocating that position, but that's just an example of where we're going to look at maybe some of the more underlying things zoning typically deals with, which is going to be density, height, open space, that kind of stuff that will indirectly impact some of those other situations.
Well, thank you for those comments, Michael. And when we get into the land use chapter, which just happens to be one of Michael's and Lord's volunteer work also, it'd probably be a good place to really put some emphasis on a particular zoning for Madaket, because there are about 5 or 6 different zoning designations right now for what we would like to amend the Madaket area to be. And I think we'd be much better off with a Madaket specific zoning, and the good starting point might be for all of us who are zoning. Look at the town code. They have a wonderful chart that talks about the various zoning designations, Lug 1, BR, like that, MMD. And you go down it, and it tells what's permitted and what's special permit and what's not permitted in those zoning designations. But the one thing that strikes me is they're all kind of one size fits all. For example, VR. There's VR in Madaket, and there's VR in many other places of the island. And each of those neighborhoods have different characteristics. And we may want to embrace a Madaket-related VR that embraces the things that Lars and Michael were talking about today. So that would be a good place to take a look. I was even thinking of trying to make a chart of what's permitted, and it's scattered throughout the code of the town of Nantucket. There's a portion of that deals with parking. So it's kind of scattered, but once you gather all the pieces, you get a big picture, and we might want to talk about that. The email I sent out that listed all the items, I think I appreciate it if you would all take a look at that. And if you have any thoughts at all, could be 3-4 words, a sentence, or whatever, let us know. Jeff, you've got experience with the land bank, and they are one of the largest landowners here, but they also have some housing out in Madaket that they use for their manager. And you know, is that employee housing or is it a dormitory? We need to resolve that, but your input might be very helpful. You know, Ethan, your experience, not only here, but Tuckernuck and elsewhere on the island, your input with the experiences you're having dealing with housing might be very helpful. And Tom, you've got a special outlook on housing because of the unique nature of Smith Point.
Most definitely.
Yeah, go ahead.
No, most definitely because of the specific characteristics, of everything, on the other side of Millie's Bridge.
Exactly. And we've all faced issues in Smith Point where someone comes in, they tear a house down, all of a sudden they're building a pool, they're building a side structure, they're looking at short-term rentals and things like that. So Smith Point is rather unique. It's kind of a cottage, low density, low height neighborhood. So these are all things I think I'd like to see the housing chapter delve into. And even though we want to keep things concise and short, some of these chapters lead themselves to more discussion than others. Does anyone else want to make a comment about housing at this point? Yes, please, Joe.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So one thing that's on the horizon that came forward for the planning board was Governor Healy just signed it's called ADU, which is accessory dwelling units, which basically is what Nantucket's been doing for years, but secondary dwellings. And then you'll see a pause where we've just said our tertiary regulations are not if we left tertiary regulations in place, someone could get a fourth structure on a property. So we've held that, but there's another part of the ADU component where someone could do a cottage colony, which is before the town. But we're going to hold it until we see how this works out. All of this is coming by right. And what is going to happen when that comes in is unless the town has the cottage colony framework in place, instead of saying, Nantucket, you have to come before the planning board, special permit, someone could come in and say, I own, 3 acres, whatever, in Madaket and lug one. I can change that zoning and I can do, say, 5,000 square foot lots, break it down to whatever that is. And it's almost, I don't want to use the phrase 40B, but there is that trigger that they can do it by right. So this is where Megan Trudell brought this forward, and then out of nowhere, this kind of surfaced very quickly and is coming in. So this is where I think when this comes up at town meeting, or we start having conversations about the cottage colony again, I would love for more Madaket people to come in or weigh in what is written by our staff. There was, I think, 8 of us on this group, and we're trying to. It's also, like, instead of having a 40B, we would like to reduce it in half, or maybe keep it down a third of what it could get by state regulations. So this is where I think getting this framework in place, getting our thoughts on paper and working with the planning board is going to be extremely important. And then, once it moves forward, the cottage colony article is saying that, Madaket as a whole is, in favor of this and working together because, we'll go before the planning board and then have review. It's not going to just come as a right. So I just want to give you guys a heads up that, this is moving very, very quickly. Thankfully, we're ahead of everyone in the state, but at the same time, they should have just kind of cut us off and said, Nantucket is been doing this for years. We should leave them alone. But it did come in and it uh, didn't undercut us, but it did kind of sneak up on us and um, change some of our regulations or conflict with them, and theirs are more less restrictive. But we can't making that's where we really got to be careful of how this kind of comes through. So I think that the definitions really need to define quickly. I think the Vieira zone works really well in Madaket. I think the cottage colony would be houses that are 22 feet high, 1, 2 family dwellings, um, possibly here or there, three third bedroom. And the character that I would say that the planning board and the cottage colony work group was looking for was, going down Washington Ave in Madaket. Small little structures, little cottages that work really well. Pot barely, handful or whatever, a couple of them at a story and a half, but most of them trying to keep them single story. And that may be a kind of a balancing act of give you a little more ground cover, but because you don't want to go up. So it's a formula that we're working on, but because this came through, we paused it and really wanted, because they're still tweaking the ADU paperwork and language as it's going forward. So I think that that's really important for something us to follow and watch and have our input from that seat. And I'm on that work group with the cottage colony. So I think that would be really smart. And the other thing is to get Holly involved in maybe setting up restrictions on some of the houses that we know are historic, that are, 70, 1975 and before, to really kind of set those guidelines in place and afford protections. And she knows that there's a form and a process that could go from the state that would protect it. I mean, if someone came in and said, "Oh, I want to do 1,000 square feet," you have to gut the entire house and bring it up to code. So that means insulation, the windows, etc. So it's there's a lot of moving parts going on in Nantucket that I think we need to kind of pay attention. So I do think that we could, have a meeting with Magdradell on zoning. I think bring in Holly. And I think the last thing you guys brought up was building Wisconsin in mind is maybe sit down with Michael May and say, what did this cost for the Wisconsin book? What was the time frame? Who worked with it? Really kind of work together. And I think that that would be really wise to say, all right, we got to create a budget for that and really kind of get that moving forward. But Michael May was the driving force for the Wisconsin, building Wisconsin in mind. So I think that it would be really important to kind of reach out to some of these people. They may hold our hand. They may just kind of say, "This is what we did. Here's my draft. Here's my outline, or whatever." But there's no sense reinventing the wheel if someone's done this a couple of times. So thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thanks for that update, Joe. Did we abandon the tiny house concept, or is that playing into the cottage issue?
No, that's still on the table, and there's a house that's going in Wisconsin, and it's a modular house, one box. It's a one-family house. It's linear. It's Val Oliver, did a fantastic job. I'll give her props. It's been approved for the ACC. Cottage Colony. We have about 6 little schematic designs we put before some of the HCC members that they really liked. And so that's been kind of, we're trying to set the table, if you will, and get everything in place. So um, when the ADU is enforced, or we're coming to town meeting with the cottage colony plan, that most of the pieces in place. So not to say there can't be tweaks or adjustments at a HCC meeting for design, but the guidelines and it should be in your town meeting packet. I don't think it was withdrawn in time, so I think it's in there, but we've said take no action. Yeah, so um, I, even though it says that, read it, get an understanding of what we're hoping to do, but then know that the state is much less restrictive and would allow more structures being constructed, or homes and dwellings.
Michael, you had your hand raised. Go
The
ahead.
question for Joe, what are the septic versus sewage implications with a cottage colony?
So that is the other part of the component that we're working on. And what we've been kind of finding is that they would probably go to tight tanks. We're kind of guesstimating. I mean, there's a project that is coming before the town or came up, and it's been I won't mention it, but it's been having some neighborhood backlash. and but they're looking to have the town bring, sewer line. And but that's where I'm also like, well, how does this work? Does the 5,000 square feet work with having its own septic system? Is there buffers? Are there waivers? Or can they create a site that's independent that would service a couple of homes? Or, what is that? And no one really quite knows that. And that's what we're kind of working on very quickly. We've got to come up with some conceptual plan to say, all right, if we do this house at this square footage, can they, in a 5,000 square foot lot, can they fit a septic? I mean, I know I'm working on one in Codfish Park, and you have a very small lot. The house is going to be about 900 to 1,000 square feet, and they're able to get a 3-bedroom septic in there. Um, there's room to do it. But our belief and letting you all know, I mean, one of the ones we use as an example is if you're driving out Milestone Road on the left, there's this little Monomoy village, which looks like some Wisconsin homes. But I think the other thing of that is, how do we get a concept for Madaket so that it looks like the houses on Washington Street, that this single story, how do you make it affordable? How do you get the covenant homes, affordability, which is I think around 1.4 million, and keep that component and make it, workable. But that's where we're just kind of having a little bit of that balancing act and working quickly. So
Thanks, Bill. As you know, some of you know, the Madaket Conservation Association get a grant for Nantucket Land and Water Council to conduct a density build-out study for Madaket. And just briefly, if sewer comes to Madaket, the way the zoning is now and the way houses are laid out, that would allow the addition of about 2,000 more bedrooms in Madaket. People expanding and, longer have the restrictions of the distance between wells and septic systems and things like that. And we have a copy of that density study. Obviously, we participated in it, but that's a factor as well. David Madaket, I see you're here. My intent was to go into your economic development chapter, but I think we're running out of time. So I hope you didn't make any special arrangements for this, but I don't think it's going to fit.
No worries. Next time.
Okay. Regarding next time, I'm not trying to adjourn the meeting, but next time for March, I'd like to include an agenda items for reviewing Peter Heffenreffer's Chapter 5, Natural and Cultural Resources. He's worked very hard on that, and there's a document in Google Drive that shows his thoughts and his work. And if you want to get into it, we could talk a little bit about the boundary subject, and perhaps I could post some of those various boundary graphics and explanations for you on the Google Drive. So we talked about zoning, so it might be good to have that as a brief item because it does flop into all the other or most of the other chapters. And we're fortunate to have Joe here because he's so heavily involved in the planning department. He really knows his way around. So this is good advice. Does anybody have anything specific they'd like to bring up about this discussion of housing? If not, that's fine. I want to be careful on the 40B. For 5 years, I've been working on something called a general land area minimum. This is a study that has been done by 2 communities in Massachusetts, and it basically triggers when a 40B is filed. You've got 2 weeks to file this GLAM report that basically says you're immune to a 40B because of how much of your land area is available for development versus how much is available. And Nantucket has played with that. They left some pieces out that I think are pretty big. For example, the acreage of roads that we have on Nantucket, not developable, obviously. So these are all important issues, and we could play with that with our area plan, and I think it's suitable. Leslie, thank you for joining us. Just to let you know, the meeting is for the first time using the town's AI generation for summary, and I think that would be very helpful with the minutes. So.
Yes, I am an hour off. I apologize.
Well, we welcome you anyway.
I'm in a
Well,
different
all
time
right.
zone.
Yeah.
We'll just start over, Leslie. Okay, you can start.
I'm
Does
sure
anyone have
you'd love to
anything
do
else
that.
they'd like to add to the meeting at this point?
What is our next date?
The next date is March 14th. It's the second Friday of March. And I would like to also throw in the economic development chapter because there's some important stuff in that chapter. So I would appreciate any of your thoughts and comments. I sent out a document to you on housing with little bullet points, about 10 or 12 of them. Maybe it'll trigger some thoughts for you. So feed them in and we'll get them listed. So I guess I can entertain a motion to adjourn and everybody can get the cocktail time.
So move.
Michael made a motion to adjourn. Does anyone second it?
Second.
Jesse, that you?
Yep, and happy
Okay, Jess,
Valentine's
thanks.
Day, everybody.
Is anybody opposed to calling this meeting into adjournment? Please raise your hand. I will take that as a unanimous vote by the work group that we are now adjourned.
I
Joe,
vote
thank
yeah.
you for hosting, and you can stop recording. I appreciate it, and we'll see how this AI thing works. Thanks, Lars.
Thanks, you guys.